Good morning. I'm Sarah, survivor, clarity coach, author, speaker, and I work with women to help them figure out ways to become safe, stable, and strong after toxic relational stress. This is my Jesus bubble. I'm a little late this morning. Usually I do this much earlier in the day, but I've been reading Hinds Feet on High Places, and I wanted to share a chapter with you. Feel free to look through the rest of the chapters in my videos this month. We've been doing quite a few of them. So, Much Afraid is at the main waterfall on her journey to the high places. And we are, the title of today's chapter is called Grave on the Mountains. It's a super short one, not very long, but it's good. You ready to read with me? The path led forward to the edge of a yawning chasm and then stopped dead. This grave-like gorge yawned before them in each direction as far as they could see, completely cutting off all further progress. It was so filled with cloud and mist that they could not see how deep it was, nor could they see across to the other side, but spread before them like a great gaping grave, waiting to swallow them up. For a moment, Much Afraid wondered whether this could be the place, after all, but as they halted on the edge of the canyon, they could plainly hear the sound of the mighty swirling waters, and she realized they must be standing somewhere near the lip of the great fall, and that this was indeed the place appointed. Looking at her companions, she asked quietly, What must we do now? Can we jump across to the other side?" "No," they said, "it would be impossible." "What then are we to do?" she asked. "We must leap down into the canyon," was the answer. "Of course," said Much Afraid at once. "I did not realize it first, but that is the thing to do." Then, for the last time on that journey, though she did not know it at the time, she held out her hand to her two companions that they might help her. But this time she was so weak and exhausted that instead of taking her hands, they came close up to her and put their hands beneath her arms so that she leaned with her full weight against them. Thus, with suffering and sorrow supporting her, Much Afraid cast herself down into the yawning grave. The place into which they had thrown themselves was deep, and had she been alone, she must have been badly hurt by the fall. However, her companions were so strong that the jump did not seem to harm them at all, and they bore her so easily between them and broke the fall so gently that she was no more than bruised and shaken. Then, because the canyon was so filled with mist and cloud that nothing was visible, they began to feel their way slowly forward and saw looming up before them a flat, oblong rock. On reaching it, they found it to be some kind of stone altar with the indistinct figure of someone standing behind it. "This is the place," said Much Afraid quietly. "This is where I am to make my offering." She went up to the altar and knelt down. "My lord," she said softly through the mist, "will you come to me now and help me to make my burnt offering as you have commanded me?" But for the first time on all that journey, there seemed to be no answer at all, and the shepherd did not come. She knelt there, quite alone in the cold, clammy mist, beside the desolate altar in this valley of shadow, and into her mind came the words which bitterness had flung at her long before when she walked the shores of loneliness. "Sooner or later, when he gets you up on the wild places of the mountains, he will put you on some sort of a cross and abandon you to it." It seemed that in a way bitterness had been right, thought Much Afraid to herself, only he had been too ignorant to know, and she too foolish at the time to really understand that in all the world only one thing mattered: to follow the one that she loved, no matter what it involved or the cost. Strangely enough, as she knelt there by the altar, seemingly abandoned at that last tremendous crisis, there was no sign nor sound of the presence of her enemies. The grave up on the mountains is at the very edge of the high places and is beyond the reach of pride and bitterness and resentment and self-pity, yes, and of fear, too, as though she were in another world altogether, for they can never cast themselves down into that grave. She knelt there, feeling neither despair nor hope. She knew now, without a shadow of doubt, that there would be no angel to call from heaven to say that the sacrifice need not be made, and this knowledge caused her neither dread nor shrinking. She felt nothing but a great stillness, in which only one desire remained, to do that which he had told her simply because he had asked it of her. The cold, dull desolation which had filled her heart in the cave was gone completely. One flame burned there steadily, the flame of concentrated desire to do his will. Everything else had died down and fallen into ashes. After she had waited for a little, and still he had not come, she put out her hand, and with one final effort of failing strength, grasped the natural human love and desire growing in her heart, and struggled to tear them out. At first touch, it was as though anguish pierced through her every nerve and fiber, and she knew with a pang almost of despair that the roots had wound and twined and thrust themselves into every part of her being. Though she put forth all her remaining strength in the most desperate effort to wrench them out, not a single rootlet stirred. For the first time, she felt something akin to fear and panic. She was not able to do this thing which he had asked of her. Having reached the altar at last, she was powerless to obey. Turning to those who had been her guides and helpers all the way up the mountains, she asked for their help, and for them to do what she could not for herself, to tear the plant out of her heart. For the first time, suffering and sorrow shook their heads. "We have done all that we can for you," they answered, "but this we cannot do." At that, the indistinct figure behind the altar stepped forward and said quietly, "I am the priest of this altar. I will take it out of your heart if you wish." Much Afraid turned toward him instantly. "Oh, thank you," she said. "I beg you to do so." He came and stood beside her, his form indistinct and blurred by the mist, and then she continued entreatingly, "I am a very great coward. I am afraid that the pain may cause me to try to resist you. Will you bind me to the altar in some way so that I cannot move? I would like to not be struggling while the will of my Lord is done." There was complete silence in the cloud-filled canyon for a moment or two. Then the priest answered, "It is well. I will do so." When he had finished, Much Afraid lifted her face toward the high places which were quite invisible and spoke quietly through the mist. "My Lord, behold me. Here I am, in the place you sent me to, doing the thing you told me to do. For where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." Ruth 1:17. Still there was silence, as silence of the grave. For indeed she was in the grave of her own hopes, and still without the promised Hinds feet, still outside of the high places with even the promise to be laid down on the altar. This was the place to which the long, heartbreaking journey had led her. Yet just once, before she laid it down on the altar, Much Afraid repeated the glorious promise which had been the cause of her starting for the high places. "The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet like hinds' feet, and he will make me to walk up on my high places." Habakkuk 3:19. The priest put forth a hand of steel right into her heart. There was a sound of rending and tearing, and the human love, with all its myriad rootlets and fibers, came forth. He held it for a moment and then said, "Yes, it was ripe for removal. The time had come. There is not a rootlet torn or missing." When he had said this, he cast it down on the altar and spread his hands above it. There came a flash of fire which seemed to rend the altar, and after that, nothing but ashes remained, either of the love itself which had been so deeply rooted in her heart, or of the suffering and sorrow which had been her companions on that long, strange journey. A sense of utter, overwhelming rest and peace engulfed Much Afraid, At last, the offering had been made, and there was nothing left to be done. She leaned forward over the ashes on the altar and said with complete thanksgiving, "It is finished." And then, utterly exhausted, she fell asleep. And that is the end of part 1. I can relate to so much of Much Afraid's journey in this allegory as she goes through loneliness and exhaustion and fatigue and tribulation and pain and illness and loss, and then finally going through pulling out, excuse me, been awake too early this morning, going through pulling out all of the selfish love, the self-centeredness, and saying, God, I don't want this kind of love. I want the kind of love that you give, the kind of love that is focused on what is best, not just what I want. And it is a journey. For certain, it's a journey. Especially after you've experienced toxic relational stress and trauma, betrayal trauma, abuse, harm, letdown, abandonment, neglect, any of these things. And that's actually what I do to help women. So if you're stumbling along and trying to figure out what your next best steps are, I'd love to have you join me. I'll drop a link underneath and you can check it out more. I'll see you tomorrow.